and it's a big pleasure for me to welcome you today to another session of our research colloquium, Digital Governance Research Colloquium. And it's already the last session this semester, and we have a very, very attractive topic today, a very, very promising speaker. It's Lukas Lorenz, Dr. Lukas Lorenz he has recently finished his PhD in Utrecht University about the use of AI, the impact of AI algorithmization in regulatory agencies, looking at experiences in the Netherlands. But he also has done research on predictive policing, so the use of AI in policing. He has a very broad public administration, public policy, political science background, organizational science background, and is currently, after finishing his PhD, he has then moved back to Germany. He originally comes from Germany and is now working for PD. So that's the in-house consultancy for the public sector here in Germany of the federal government. Lukas, it's a very big pleasure, and I just wanted to mention what he's presenting today. The myth of algorithmization is the outcome of a very, very, rewarding, so interesting to read PhD he defended last April. I had the pleasure to be member of the doctoral committee, and we were deeply impressed by this research, and I thought it's a wonderful opportunity in our research colloquium to give him the chance to present some of the key findings on. And it's the fascinating thing of what I found. It's an ethnographic approach. So he really joined meetings, took a very in-depth look at what was going on in this regulatory agency to understand what impact AI and the idea of algorithms had in such regulatory agencies, and what impact that had on actors, on the dynamics of actors working together, and also how that was shaped by institutional factors in these organizations. Lukas, without much further introduction, one short thing I wanted to mention. We will record the presentation by Lukas, so the first half an hour is the presentation. This will be recorded, and then we want to move towards a Q&A session, so we should have something like 25-30 minutes also for questions, discussions with all of you. As we are a rather large group, I expect many more to join. I would ask you to mute your microphones. We use the hands up signal, so you then indicate to me that you have a question, or you also can put your question in the chat, and we then, via that, move into an hopefully very, very interesting and stimulating discussion with Lukas. Without further notice, Lukas, the floor is yours, and very best thanks for joining us, and we are all eager to hear more about your research and the findings.
Thank you so much, Gerd, for these really kind words and for inviting me to the colloquium today. I'm really looking forward to presenting some of my findings from my research. Yeah, and it's really nice to now look back at the PhD research, now working more on like practitioners' view and trying to like figure out how the digitalization and the use of AI and algorithms can be improved in Germany as well. I will now share my slides. Give me a second. So you should be able to see my slides now.
Already working, can confirm that.
Perfect, that's great to hear. Before going into depth about the myth of algorithmic relation, which is also the title of my dissertation, and telling you more about the research, I wanted to briefly look back and tell you like a really short story from a practitioners conference I went to in October. In the Netherlands, they invited me back to share some of my results from my research. And these were like regulatory agencies and their employees. And I was giving a talk on my dissertation and the findings. And then we had also Q&A session afterwards, and this one person showed hands and said like, oh, so is the adoption and use of algorithms cost efficient? And I was really shocked by the question, not because of the question, but like I realized that no one had asked me this question during 4 years of doing PhD research at any conference, any conversation that I had in the academic world. So there may be somewhat of a gap between what is going on research in the field of governance and public administration, and what is happening in the organizations that try to adopt algorithms. And then I talked to one of my research contacts who was also at the conference after, and he said he gets this question all the time. And what he usually says, so he's like a data scientist, and he said what he's responding, then he says, cost efficient in comparison to what? And of course he insinuated that the current practice would also not be cost efficient in every way, which I think is right. And there's two things that I wanted to say with this story is that, first of all, I think, and I hope we have a discussion today that may bring up new issues, new questions, and that allow us to think a little bit differently about the adoption of algorithms and what matters in this conversation. So please feel free to ask questions that may be weird or different than other questions that you might expect. And second of all, I wanted to introduce a little broader question at the beginning here to keep in mind during the presentation. And I think this is more about like change in general in public organizations.
I'm telling
right?
you, someone gave me a gun.
Someone is not muted now, it's muted, perfect. So when it comes to like this kind of social technological change, we often seem to strive for kind of the perfect change, the perfect results, and we seem to idealize the status quo, right? How current practices, how rational they are or how irrational, and we seem to not wanting to change for anything less than a perfect result. And while my research shows that kind of there are huge expectations when it comes to the use of algorithms and AI in the public sector, these huge expectations are rarely met in practice, but it also shows that some of the fears and risks that are linked to the use of algorithms and AI also seem to have been moderated by existing institutional logics and practices in public organizations. And I was wondering, is that kind of the ideal scenario of change that we can hope for in public organizations or public administration? And are these kind of strong myths, like the myth of algorithmic relation, really needed to bring about change at all? Or do they make more change, make the change more difficult, and because the expectations are so high and will never be met, and everyone is left disappointed? So lots of questions I wanted just to put out there to maybe think about during my talk, and maybe we can have a discussion on it afterwards. But now I'll get into the details, and I would like to start off with a quote, and it reads, "Data analytics doesn't sell itself. Something has to be done for that. I think we are still missing that awareness. We think that it will be fine, that if your business case or your model is good enough, everyone will embrace it, but that's nonsense. I've never seen it work that way. All the times I've seen it work like that is zero." And this is a quote from an advisor for algorithmic regulation at a Dutch inspectorate where I did some of my research. And I also put it right at the beginning of my dissertation because I found a really powerful quote. And it points out that there may be more to adopting algorithms in the public sector, especially good algorithms, than the technology itself. But what this more is that needs to be done kind of remained unclear and kind of triggered the interest in me to further look into this. And I think the kind of the high hopes and expectations and then the organizational reality, I wanted to really see if we can make a distinction between these two. And I was looking for a concept to use, and then I found the concept of the myths, the rationalized myths. And that really helped me to describe these two, to differentiate between the expectation and what is going on in reality. And myths are usually taken for granted ideas that are believed to be the best means to achieve particular aims. That's really abstract. But for example, we can think of the invisible hand of the market, right? This idea from economy that there is a way of organizing demand and supply, and that gives the impression that the market functions in a really rational way, in a really legitimate way, in a certain time and place, right? Today, maybe many people would agree that this is not the taken for granted idea of how the economy should be organized, but in a certain socioeconomic, socio-historical context, this was maybe the taken for granted idea of how to organize the economy. And if we comply with this myth, we can signal that an organization operates in a rational and appropriate and this legitimate way. And that for organizations, that's really important because it may help their institutional survival. So not being merged or even defunded as a public organization is, of course, quite relevant. So on the basis of this concept, I formulated the myth of algorithmic regulation, which signifies the taken for granted idea that algorithms will improve processes and practices in regulatory agencies. And with improve, I usually mean make them more effective and efficient, so help them use their resources in an effective way. And this myth, of course, is not like in any way universal or uniform, but it may be constructed in varying ways in the scientific literature. It may be somewhat different than compared to the media or in policy documents or even by practitioners in a certain field or organization. But we can see that there's like kind of overarching ideas, narratives that come back again and again. For example, when we look at national AI strategies where governments lay out their plans to use AI in the future and what they hope to achieve by using this technology. However, to realize the potential improvements that these promises and expectations, regulatory agencies and any public organization, of course, need to first translate this myth into organizational practice to see how we can actually make changes to the organization to realize some of these expectations. And this translation takes place through the adoption of algorithms, which in my research is much broader than only the technological process, but mostly focused on the organizational institutional transformations that come with it. Taking a step back, that means my research aims were to develop an empirical and theoretical understanding of how regulatory agencies develop, implement, and use machine learning algorithms. And I tried to find a fitting research approach for that. So I conducted, as Gerd already said, like quite exploratory ethnographic field research. I did that through in-depth case studies of regulatory agencies in the Netherlands. I selected 2 inspectorates there and followed them for a long time. And I tried to ground this whole approach in institutional theory to get a good theoretical understanding of these machine learning projects, the data scientists and other actors at the inspectorates that I studied then in practice. That brings me to one concept that I wanted to introduce, one framework that I used quite prominently in my dissertation, which is the structurational model by Olikovsky, and I adopted it here for the use of algorithms in regulatory practice. At the top, we see the institutional level, which is the regulatory agencies or regulatory institutions. Then we have the human agents, so kind of the employees and other actors within these organizations, and we have the algorithms as the technological component, and they, of course, have mutual relationships. So the regulatory institutions, of course, kind of coin how human agents act within these institutions, and then also how they use technology and how they develop technology. And by doing that, these kind of structures get inscribed into the technology, which are then again influencing the practice in these institutions, may actually change some of the institutional logics that we see. Looking back at the research, I tried to kind of aggregate some of the challenges that I observed during the research, and I tried to fit them into 3 levels. The macro level, or kind of the overarching institutional level, I think we see challenges here that are relating to rivaling institutional logics that we find within these organizations or within the field of regulation. And sometimes it remains unclear if algorithmic regulation actually adheres to these logic or kind of benefits these logics, or is like rather weakening the values that we connect to these institutional logics. So to give an example, there's quite a lot of concern usually about accountability when it comes to the use of algorithms. But in the field of algorithmic regulation or regulatory agencies in the Netherlands, there was actually hope for an improvement of accountability through the use of algorithms. So regulatory agencies in the Netherlands are often criticized for not making explicit how they have selected inspectees for inspections. And that's especially the case when it comes to a big disaster, let's say like a ship sinks or a bridge collapses. Then the media attention and the political attention is always really high, and they question the head of these regulatory agencies. Oh, why didn't you select this bridge or this ship for inspection before, and couldn't you avoid this accident from happening, right? And what the hope was that if we introduce algorithms, we have a more systematic approach on how to select inspectees for inspections, and that could actually help to for the inspectorates to rationalize their selection process and not make it too dependent on individuals within their organization to make the selection process. On the other hand, we also know that with algorithms, there are issues of transparency and maybe explainability, depending on kind of how complex the technology is. So there are also often fears that accountability will actually be reduced when introducing algorithms to public organizations. So there's often like this, it remains kind of unclear what the effects of algorithms may be on public organizations. And I think what we also kind of sometimes miss here is that when we look at the current practice, we assume that there is accountability for these decisions, and that we can explain why a certain inspectee has been selected or not by just asking the responsible person. But of course, that's often not the case, right? We can also often not reconstruct in the current practice how decisions have been made. So there may be again a point where we kind of idealize the current practices in public organizations and want to only change for something that is kind of an ideal scenario of accountability, also when we use when we use algorithms in regulatory settings. Coming to the meso level, these are kind of the organizational issues that we find, and one which is also, I think, a much broader point for innovation in general. We see that there is a mismatch between the adoption of algorithms for a particular use case, and to enable a much broader organizational transformation that is necessary to also support this whole change process, right? So we see algorithms are being developed for niche applications. One of the examples in my research was indeed the shipping context. So they developed machine learning algorithms to apply to risk assessment systems that are already existing in the organization, and they try to improve through analyzing more data and different kind of data, these risk assessments. And that's, of course, really kind of a niche application. And the algorithm is only built for that and cannot be used for anything else, really different from what we see with ChatGPT or other types of AI. But to make this work long-term in the organization and to really change how the organization operates, many more tasks are needed to take it into account. So it's not only about building algorithms, but it's also kind of about how to integrate it into existing IT systems, how to get data, how to update the data, how to maintain the model performance, how to integrate accountability structures, et cetera, right? So we have a much broader organizational transformation. It always is difficult to connect individual projects and individual change approaches to this broader organizational topics. And on a third level, which is the micro level, so the kind of the level of the individuals, we see that there's sometimes conflicting claims to authority over and responsibility for the algorithm and for the system that is being used, and sometimes also very conflicting understanding of quality and rules that can be applied to algorithms. So this was really evident in my research when it came to the divide between data scientists who were organized in kind of a data lab within the organization, and the IT experts in the organization who were really like pushing back on any type of change in the organization, really were concerned about making the IT system safe and having them secured and being stable, whereas the data scientists tried to really change how these systems could work, how they could implement algorithms for the users, for the inspectors to be used, right? And so they had very different ideas of what a good quality algorithm is, and I think that extends way beyond only this divide between data scientists and IT experts, but also managers may have very different ideas of what a good quality algorithm is compared to inspectors. So inspectors may hope to get like really concrete advice on what they should do when they go out for an inspection into the field. They are also quite autonomous in how they make decisions. So they're on the one hand really experts on a specific field, and they have of course also this function of supervising other organizations. So they are in a very independent position. And then we have like the managers who try to increase effectiveness and efficiency within their organization, and they're very much in line with the organizational goals. So we see that they expect very different things from an algorithm, and to integrate these expectations and the different values that we attach to what we want to achieve when using algorithms in any public organizations need to be brought together in some way. And one way where it actually worked, or where we see maybe an approach that could be useful, is the role of public sector data scientists in these two organizations that I researched. And I described their work as hybrid work because they integrate different logics into their practices and have a range of different tasks that go way beyond only the technological, but more the organizational, institutional aspects of the work as well. So for example, they often favored really simple models over more complex technological models because they realized they are much more suitable for the organizational institutional context in which they worked. And that was reason enough to say, okay, we can reduce the complexity, and it's actually more beneficial for the organization to develop simple technology rather than more complex. And another example is that they had a really strong focus on complying with rules and regulations, especially being part of an organization that supervises the compliance with rules and regulations by other organizations. They had like really a strong interest in that. And for example, with more like ethical aspects, they developed this kind of review process where they asked peers to review the models that they had developed, which also brings in like some kind of, I think, scientific logic here, which is, I think, quite interesting maybe to further research and further explore how that actually has an influence on the public organizations and how they operate. However, this idea of hybridity may also, and this is not really part of my research anymore, but maybe something to think about if it has it may be a principle for successful algorithmic regulation and transformation of public organizations more in general, because I think taking different logics into account here is something of a key aspect, especially taking into account kind of the political logics that play a role, and there are people there in public organizations at the top of these organizations to do that, but also taking into account the citizen's perspective or the user perspective here, I think is really relevant. So thinking about how this can be organized is very important. Coming back to the integration of these different logics, we also saw in the research that there are also limits to that. So you cannot ask the data scientists to do everything. So for example, when it came to data issues and legal issues, it was quite evident that there was a point where it became really difficult for them to integrate all these different tasks into their work. And then for the organization, it was more beneficial to integrate a new role into the organization, somewhat of a data legal expert who could like then also bridge the gaps between the legal experts and the data experts. To make this even a little bit more concrete, I pose this question: what does that mean for you as a practitioner in this field of introducing algorithms and AI to public organizations? And I try to summarize this into 3 groups. If you use the algorithm or work with its results, I think you should approach the developers and discuss how to be involved throughout the entire process. So it's really important to participate in that and take your perspectives into account. And you should talk to your managers about the aims of using algorithms and demand also that time is being allocated to these new tasks and responsibilities. If you develop, maintain, or enable the use of algorithms, I think it's really important to start building bridges to other employees and departments in the organization and beyond. So relying on the division of labor is crucial for this process to really transform the organization and not only build niche algorithms that are used or not used, but don't really have an organizational effect. And you should remind yourself that your work is not just the technological part, but also the kind of political, administrative, and sector-specific logics need to be taken into account, and you should behave accordingly. And for the managers or consultants or people that supervise groups 1 and 2, I think they should ask themselves what they want to achieve by using algorithms and really develop their own kind of myth in the organization. So what is really what they want to achieve? What are the expectations connected to the use of algorithms? And help enable group 1 and 2 to do their work, ideally in a collaboratively but critical way, if using algorithms really is a priority for the organization. Well, and that brings me back to the end, the reflection. What is all of this in a nutshell? I think algorithmic regulation is a very powerful idea that has the potential to further rationalize inspectorates and improve regulation, yet an over-reliance on rationality and algorithms may also have negative consequences. I think we can, for example, think of the reducing discretion in the organization, so room for decisions not based on formal rules and algorithmic advice. Automated biases and discrimination, of course, is an issue. And there may also be too much focus on effectiveness and efficiency compared to other values, such as transparency, accountability, and trust. And I think what really remains important is to make these goals explicit and to organize the process in the way that is purposefully to realize these goals, and in the end also to stay embedded into the democratic system, use the public and science in the broad sense, scientific research for scrutiny and as accountability fora, to further improve how algorithms are being used. And I think these also offers quite a lot of avenues for further research, especially because my research was really limited to kind of early stage algorithmization. So really organizations being at the brink of introducing algorithms and how this may play out once they are some years in or have successfully adopted algorithms in a specific part of the organization. These are, I think, open questions that need to be further looked at. So I hope I may have inspired some more research